Welcome to the Connection Podcast. I am Lauren Dry, also known as the Connection Catalyst. Connection and this podcast are deeply personal for me. As a driven professional, I found myself thriving in business, but struggling at home. And it wasn't until one marriage breakdown and one marriage reset later that I discovered what really works to create connection in modern relationships using science, simplicity, and soul. That's how Rise into Regulation was born, our signature program that's now helping so many others finally find clarity and ease for good. Today I'm joined by Cat Dunn, an award-winning online business manager, mentor, speaker, and host of the Life After I Left podcast. Cat helps visionary women simplify their systems and step into leadership, but what really stands out is how she brings honesty and depth to the way that she shows up. Her story touches on business, survival, and starting over in a really powerful way. Kat, I am so glad you're here. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you think this is an episode that my audience really needs to hear?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it today. And as you can hear, I'm originally from England and now live in Melbourne, Australia. And I came to Australia for a relationship. And during that time, I discovered that I could have my own business and set up my life in a way that works for me. The problem I was having is, as much as I was thriving in business, as much as I was trying to build a life in a brand new country, my relationship was the biggest problem in my life. Because unfortunately, the person that I fell in love with turned out not to be a very nice person. And I ended up in a domestic violence relationship. And the reason I wanted to be on this podcast today is because I'm a big believer in connection as well. And I believe we connect by storytelling. And storytelling is medicine because it's not make-believe. It's not a fairy tale princess in a castle. The real, true, good stories are based on personal experiences. And I want to share today because women who are listening, this is affecting at least 1 in 4 women. So no matter what room you're in, what community you're in, what school ground you're in, anything like that, you're surrounded by women who are going through domestic violence or have lived experience or are experiencing it through a family member or a friend. And I want to break the silence and the shame around that topic.
Kat, that's so powerful. And if you haven't heard that statistic before around how 1 in 4 women have been subject to some kind of domestic violence, I mean, it's shocking. And I think when I look around at my friends, my family, the women I know, I think what stands out the most is, oh, it can't be 1 in 4. It can't be 1 in 4. But I think that that's a huge testament to this block for women around how awful it can feel, how there's a stigma, there's an unearned sense of, shame. How did this happen to me? How did I not see this coming? And I'd love to get your take on that. What's your lived experience? What's your personal experience with other people's stories? When you match it up against that number of 1 in 4 women, it's overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. And that's just one statistic. How many women have been victims of other assaults? There's so many terrible things happening to women all the time that, again, there's taboos around we can't talk about. When it specifically comes to domestic violence, I think the problem we're having is, apart from the fact there's not enough conversation around it, people hear those 2 words and they assume physical. Someone's being physically abused, and that's not the case. And in my last domestic violence relationship, because I've had more than one, unfortunately, he never hit me. He never hit me once because he's too smart for that. I was subjected to emotional manipulation, digital control, and coercive control. And so that's huge. But I guarantee there'll be people listening who at some point in their life date somebody who did actually subject them to some form of domestic violence, but they might not have been aware that's what was happening. It can start as small as someone telling you what you can and can't wear, what you can and can't say, or when you're not with them, you have to respond right away. They have to call you, you have to answer. It's a very insidious form of control that I think a lot of women don't realize they're subjected to. And the 1 in 4 stat could actually be higher because of the shame and stigma around it. As someone who's actually left, I still hear, why did you stay so long? How did you not see what was happening? Or the opinion of, well, that wouldn't happen to me. How many women haven't spoken up and shared? How many women haven't reported this? that statistic could actually be completely incorrect. It might be a lot higher. And there's no shame around it because you've done nothing wrong. In my case, and a lot of survivors, all you did was just love someone with all of your heart and they abused it.
Yeah. I'm curious, what comes to you when you hear the word enmeshment, and what does that mean to you around the conversation that needs to be had around the difference between maybe forgiveness, curiosity, compassion, determination to try and make something work versus, okay, not having that clarity around what is a toxic dynamic and what really needs early intervention, early awareness, and early support so that so many women are not finding themselves in situations like this.
This is a really difficult one because as much as we have started more conversations about it and shared warning signs, etc., what's happening as well is the term narcissist or the term abuse is being thrown around a lot. And sometimes people are jumping to a conclusion they're in an abusive relationship when maybe they had an argument or the boyfriend seemed controlling but was actually quite caring. I think the biggest difference is if somebody is trying to dictate your life in a way that you feel uncomfortable, if someone is dictating how you can show up in your world, how you run your business, how you go to work, how you raise your kids, the things like what you're allowed to wear, are you allowed to leave the house, who are you allowed to be around? And particularly when it comes to money, if someone is trying to control your money, that is a huge warning sign that they're basically trying to make sure that you have to depend on them. It's such a thin line and it's such a difficult thing. And I really wish I could say, these are the three things to look for, and this is an abuser, but it's not necessarily the case. Because, for example, at the beginning of my last DV relationship, he love bombed me. So to start with, I was his whole world. He gave me loads of attention. He showered me with affection. I felt unstoppable. And then he pulled the rug from underneath me. And that's when the abuse started. But by then I was already hooked in because I'd been through this before and it was so familiar to me to be a victim of my own circumstance, to not know that I deserve better. So if you really want to identify whether or not you need support, whether you need to leave, I highly recommend looking at organization websites if you're safe to do so. There's so many articles and resources out there about identifying red flags, identifying what is good and healthy in a relationship versus, yes, this is possibly an amber, possibly a red, but it's hard to know just over a podcast without knowing someone's actual relationship and situation. The biggest thing I could say, and it might sound a little bit woo-woo, women's level of intuition is unmatched. You know that gut feeling. And when I say gut feeling, everybody's experienced it. As a woman, you know that when you walk around at night, you put your keys between your fingers. You don't go down the dark alleyway because your gut tells you to stay safe, to be safe. There will be a point in your relationship that if you're questioning whether or not this is good for you, that will kick in. And that is your biggest friend in any relationship. That's not just relationships romantically, that's business, that's making decisions in your life. You know when something doesn't feel right. And sometimes you don't have the evidence to back it up, but you know yourself better than anyone else does. And your body will tell you when you need to be warned.
How would you support someone whose biggest question, and maybe they found themselves in dynamics like this before, how do they know the difference between their intuition versus paranoia?
In my experience, and this is
Yeah.
how I identify it, intuition, I feel it in my stomach to the point where when I go against my intuition, I actually am physically unwell. It can actually make me vomit. It's quite strong. Paranoia lives in my head.
Okay. Yeah. And it's probably a powerful word. You'd probably say like hypervigilance or overprotection and hyperawareness. But is there a time where you have felt challenged, even in healthy situations and relationships, where you are putting yourself in the spot and saying, okay, what is my intuition? How do I have that somatic experience? Because something we talk about so much is the wisdom in your body, but what's that sensation like to you? Or how would you, if you were in a situation where you perhaps don't feel safe, maybe you don't feel heard, maybe you feel like your partner is incredibly controlling, or maybe you also feel controlling and stubborn and you're stuck in these cycles of not having communication be on the same page about important things, about values around social groups, values around money, values around. I really want to touch on something you mentioned a little bit earlier around digital control too. What does it look like to slow down and to have that strong relationship with yourself, even if perhaps you've been in this repetitive cycle, and perhaps, especially perhaps if some of these patterns might feel like connection? How do you build up that muscle so that you can begin to determine the difference without feeling like you need to choose self abandonment in the interests of having connection with someone else or safety in being alone?
So I'm a big fan of personal development. That's
Yeah.
the reason that I was able to leave my last relationship. I started working with coaches, learned how to do the work, was in an amazing community. Again, that's quite overwhelming because there's so many different ways that you can get in touch with yourself or learn how to move through trauma. So my biggest thing would be find something that works for you in terms of helping you get back in touch with your body. This could be something as simple as you have to allow yourself an hour a day to go for a walk outside. No podcasts, no music, and just listen to the birds and the bees or go for a walk by the ocean.
Yeah.
This could be do a session of yoga. This could be go see a shamanic healer and do some work like that, which is next level, to be honest, because you could go through some trauma doing that. But the biggest thing I can tell you is any sort of trauma is stored in the body. You can do all the work on your mindset. You can clear out your thoughts. You can feel so fresh and clean in your own head, but your body is where the triggers really lie. For example, last month, a song just played randomly in my apartment that I haven't heard since I left my last ex, and my whole body shut down because I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't expect it. And it showed me where my trauma is still being stored and the work I still need to do. And this isn't going to heal overnight. This isn't something that you just learn. Like you mentioned, it's building up that muscle memory. You go to the gym once, it's not going to work. You go to the gym every day, fantastic. You start to work on your biceps, you start to work on your six pack or whatever you want to do. It's exactly the same way. And when you start to experience triggers or you start to be in a situation where you feel overwhelmed or your body's starting to shut down, my biggest advice would be it's usually after the moment, because if you're in it, you might freeze. Think about where that started. To me, it's always my stomach. It's always my stomach is the root of everything. And then figure out ways that I can connect to that. And for me, I would sit in a meditation, possibly be in a child meditation or a chakra meditation, and focus on that one area and send so much love and compassion to that space and ask my body, what do you need to feel safe? What do you need right now? And it literally could be just sit with me. It could be make yourself a cup of tea. It could be play a song and have a dance. It's going to look different for everybody. But if you don't pay attention to where it's emanating from and paying attention to where the trigger starts and how long you're sitting in that trigger and what started the trigger in the first place, you can't then work through it. Again, using the analogy of a gym, you wouldn't go to the gym and pick up a 50K dumbbell. You would start with 1K, for example, and you build up. You have to take the small steps. And then eventually your body starts to learn to trust you because you are trusting it.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your learning process, maybe in the first relationship where you experienced this, maybe in the second. When did awareness start to come to you that this was not a healthy dynamic? And how did you first navigate that in a way that allowed you to slowly move in the direction of connection with yourself and safety, as opposed to connection with someone else at the expense of maybe your emotional, your physical, and your mental well-being?
Before my last relationship, I was actually in a 9-year long relationship where the abuse was physical. And to be honest, throughout the whole time I was with him, I didn't really think it wasn't normal because I've experienced that in my childhood. And I always knew the next day I would get over it and be friendly. The problem was we came to Australia together and we were traveling and we were in the middle of nowhere. And the violence reached such a dangerous point that I swear it was like something in my brain just snapped. And that was the moment I was like, if I don't leave, I don't think I'll be here tomorrow. And it took that level of extreme violence to realize that this wasn't okay and our dynamic was not okay. And I take as much responsibility as him for that because I was living in this dynamic for 9 years. I didn't change my behavior either. I just went along with it. And I'd like to say that that was it. And I started my healing journey, but I didn't. I did manage to leave that relationship and I got free and I was safe for a while. But I then just existed. I didn't know how to fix that. I just thought, all right, cool. I won't get in a bad relationship again. I didn't know I was in a bad relationship for 9 years. I thought it was normal. I thought it was okay. I know he loved me, at least in the way that he could, and I loved him the way that I could. So I jumped into the next relationship. Like a shark can smell blood in the water. He could sense that I was an easy target, and that's why he picked me. And yes, he wasn't physically abusive, but he abused me in other ways. And I was in it, but I kept thinking, well, at least he doesn't hit me, or at least we're not violent with each
Yeah.
other. At least I think he loves me. There's moments where there's glimmers of hope. I don't know how I found it, but I found a podcast with a coach and I just loved her vibe. I loved what she was saying. And I started binging episodes where she was talking about dynamics of relationships. She mentioned domestic violence in her own story. Her partner was on the podcast and they talked to each other so beautifully. And I just thought, oh, is this what it's supposed to feel like? So I started working with her and I started learning about the work and mindset and questioning your thoughts. And I was in this for a year. And again, nothing was really changing, but I did find a space where I could share. And the reflections I got from people were, do you know you deserve better? Do you know that that's okay? Do you know that this isn't safe? And logically, I was starting to understand it, but I kept finding reasons to not be in the house with him when I could, because there were certain rules I had to abide by. I couldn't hang around with certain people. But one of my safe spaces was my sister, and I was going for a walk, and I listened to this podcast, and it was called The Trap, and it was about DV. And they started listing different types of abusers, and they listed one. And I remember it was like the floor fell out from under me because they were describing my partner. And it was that moment, that was the moment where I realized I'm with another abuser. And I can't believe I didn't see it. But again, I stayed in the relationship. And it wasn't until I was finally able to escape. And even now, years and years later, everything I started to learn at the beginning, I'm starting to implement and learn more from and work through triggers and work through my healing. But it's a very, very long process. And I'll still be in it probably until the day I die.
What would you say to someone who maybe has that fear that they're in this dynamic and that what if this is it? What if I can't determine what's a safe relationship and what's not? What if this is what I'm destined for? That's an obviously scary thought to think and one that many women may worry about. And for fear of that, might think, oh, well, it's not so bad. What you mentioned there is like, at least it doesn't hit me.
It breaks my heart to think that people out there will be listening and feel that way. And unfortunately, it is true. And I know because I lived it for a very long time. And I can't dictate you leaving. I can't tell you what to do. But I will say using those words at least is a huge, if you say that, if you find yourself saying that, that is telling you that you're not in a healthy relationship. Because compromise is one thing, maybe one Christmas with your parents, one Christmas with my parents, that's a compromise. When someone is dictating how you live, your money, who you can see, what you're wearing, hitting you, yelling at you, abusing you, that is not compromise. That is you in an unhealthy relationship. And yes, sometimes it is hard to spot. Leaving is extremely difficult, particularly when it comes to if you have kids and financial aspects. And I understand it's not going to be easy for everyone. And I can't tell you to leave. But I'm sat here right now speaking to you. I did it. I did it. I got out and I have an incredible life. I have an incredible business. Yes, healing is not overnight. Healing is lifelong, but I get to heal on my own terms and decide who's in my life and decide how I show up and decide what relationships I'm going to be in. It sounds cliche to say there's light at the end of the tunnel, but there is. You do not have to live this way. And you do not have to put up with second best, which is what I was doing. There are so many amazing people out there that can show you that it is possible to get out there. And yes, going from realizing you're in a bad relationship to finally having the freedom, finally having a life that you've dreamed of is going to be a hard slog. But we have one life. And if you're unhappy now, you're still going to be unhappy in 10 years' time. People do not change unless they want to change. You can't make them change. And if you're dating someone like a narcissist, narcissists do not change because they do not see anything wrong with them. It's you that's at fault. And it's not you at fault. You're just in the wrong relationship. There are people out there living this that are proof that there is better, you deserve better, and you can get out as well.
How do you think you can support someone who's trying to determine the difference between maybe unhealthy communication patterns and cycles and how to navigate being a person who negotiates compromise versus, okay, this is someone who's dictating to me, and I either have the choice to stay or go, versus having that middle ground while you're assessing things to determine, is this a situation where there's really, really unhealthy coping skills, coping patterns on both sides, and that's something that can be worked through, versus, no, this is incredibly toxic. This is actual dictation, and you have already tried and you have already used all the tools and skills at your disposal, and this is simply a dynamic that is not going to be healthy for you long term. How do you figure that out, or how would you support someone who is in that state of confusion and perhaps has been in these dynamics before and wants to have some mastery over what's a toxic dynamic and what's an unhealthy communication pattern, and how to tell the difference?
I'm a big believer in a third party, because
Mhm.
sometimes when you're trying to communicate in a relationship, is you are bringing your own stories, your own ideas, and your own
Mhm.
opinions. And as much as it might be toxic or it might be healthy, you need to learn how to listen as well as you speak. And we don't
Yeah.
listen to each other enough, and that's in all forms of relationships. So having a third party, whether that is working with a therapist or working with a coach or working with someone who maybe is a trusted friend who can just sit with both of you, who isn't on any side, and just speak quite objectively, which is really hard. It's a skill you have to learn, because we are all emotional, particularly if you're in the middle of a fight or a disagreement or your values don't match. But you both have to put in the work. You both have to want to make this work and work on your own stories and work on your own trauma and work on where you've come from. You will know the difference if you are having the same conversation over and over again and it's not going anywhere. It's how the other person reacts to you. So if the person is literally not listening, shutting you down, maybe walking away, or getting mad at you, arguing with you over and over again, that's shown that they do not value your opinion. They're not willing to compromise, and they're not willing to look at their own behaviors. Now, I'm not going to say that that means they're an abuser, because for all we know, maybe they have something from their past that they haven't worked on. Maybe they don't know how to communicate. I know plenty of people in my life, particularly men, who were told as a young lad, as a young boy, shut up, be strong, don't cry. If you suddenly want your partner to open up and have a serious dialogue with you, they might not know how to do that, which is why the third person coming in is great. And if the other person is willing, for example, to go to therapy or speak to someone else outside of you, that's a good sign that they are willing to change and work on themselves. But you will know if you're in a situation where you're constantly just shut down, but you cannot talk to them. I was in a 3.5 year relationship. He never spoke to me. And I tried everything. I wrote down letters. I practiced what I was going to say. And I just got shut down every time because he turned it around and made it my fault. And I realized it was an abusive relationship because he kept doing that over and over again, because he kept making it about me and about how I was an abuser, or how I was difficult, or how I was cheating, and all these things that I had proof I wasn't. I was being gaslit so badly that by the end of it, I didn't see the point in having a conversation because nothing was changing.
Mm.
But that's why I think it's really important to work with a coach or join a program where you can assess what dynamic you're actually having, see if you're both willing to
Yeah.
do the work on yourselves to come together, and practice listening, practice it with a friend. Because often you'll find that when you're in a conversation or you're trying to share something, you're automatically thinking of what to say next. You're not thinking about what the person's saying, and people can sense that. So if you want your partner to listen to you, ask yourself, are you listening to your partner?
Yeah. That's huge, and I think it takes so much self-trust. And when you've been in toxic dynamics for a while, I think that that's the first thing to go. Can I trust myself? Do I trust my own reality? Do I trust how my body is showing up and communicating versus my words? Do I feel like I have a strong relationship with myself so that I can pause in those moments and, like you mentioned earlier, do some yoga, go for a walk? Am I regularly nourishing my relationship with myself so that I can trust myself when I'm in a relationship with others, and that my communication comes from a place of deep self certainty, as opposed to, okay, well, my therapist told me to say this, and this is what someone on TikTok told me to do, so I'm just going to do this. But your whole body's screaming, and you don't feel that sense of connection while you're using these tools. Instead, it just feels like performance of, like, well, this is what I have to do in order to maintain connection. I think it's so important. That's such a important picture around how, yes, the willingness of someone else is incredibly important, but we have to trust ourselves enough to be able to sit back and listen and have a clear picture of how our own communication is showing up, so that sense of certainty is in any dynamic, so that if there is a fear, if there is a worry, that there are incredibly unhealthy dynamics at play, toxic dynamics, that it isn't necessarily a conversation around, oh, how do we have better communication skills? Instead, it's, okay, this is dangerous and I need to leave. I think you really touched on something so valuable there about, yes, willingness is important, but the ability to pause and that ability to have your relationship, firstly, with your own self, so that you can have discernment about what's happening. And I think that that's so special. I'm curious, how would you support someone who's trying to find their own relationship with themselves, to have discernment around what's healthy and what's not healthy, versus what's a toxic communication pattern that so many of us have and have inherited? And maybe, like you said, when we're working with a coach, particularly someone who's a master at somatics and unconscious mind patterns, how would you say that they should begin to build that relationship with themselves, so that that discernment is possible and they're not stuck in this dance of like, okay, is it me and is it my patterns? I just need to work on myself, versus, no, it's the dynamic itself and I need to get out before it gets worse, for my sake, for their sake, for my family's sake, and because it's the right thing to do.
I think that comes down to, as you were talking about, trust. And I struggle with trust so badly, like self-trust, because I constantly shame myself and blame myself for spending 20 years in really bad relationships, which I would say completely messed me up. Which isn't really true, because I am who I am because of what I went through. And to be honest, part of me would never take any of it back, because I get now to stand here and share my story and help other women to do the same, to leave relationships and own their voice. When it comes to that bit of communication, self-trust, discernment, my advice is, and people might hate this, is you have to speak. You have to start talking, but talking in the way of not just filling the sounds and not talking around stuff, not asking somebody, oh, how was your drive today? How's the weather going? Find someone you like, know, and trust. And if you don't have anybody, ring an organization, ring Lifeline, take a moment, take a deep breath, and say out loud the thing that you need to say. Whether that's, I think I might be in an abusive relationship. Can I please tell you what I'm going through? Which is a huge thing to say. It's massive. I understand that. Or what I like to do is, I'm a big fan of storytelling, as I mentioned. Say to a friend, can I tell you a story? So yesterday I came home and my partner said to me, and tell it like that. Tell it in a way that it did happen to you, but you're not in it. You're not reliving it. You are objectively talking about something that you experienced, and then see how the other person reacts. And when the other person reacts and speaks back to you, don't jump in, don't get defensive, just listen. Listen to what they have to say. When they're finished, you can then obviously continue the conversation. But the key part about this is, as you tell this, and please be honest and tell something real. Tell something that maybe you don't know whether it is abuse or whether that's a weird thing, or should I be concerned about this? Say it out loud and see how your trusted friend or trusted organization responds to you. And when you've listened, reverse that in your head and say, if my best friend, my daughter, my sister, my mother had asked me that, how would I have responded? And what would I immediately think? Because what we do is we jump to conclusions and we put our own stamp on things. But if you genuinely believe that you're in a toxic dynamic, that you're unsafe, and the thing that you shared out to your friend or the organization, if they give it back to you, you know automatically you'd be like, get out, leave him, I'll support you, I'll do this, I'll do that. But we don't take our own advice. But also, we shouldn't be dictating what someone else does. That's why you need someone trusted, someone who knows you, someone who can respect what you're trying to do here, because you don't want someone else's opinions and judgments being thrown down your throat. You just want someone to listen to what they're saying. And that is a hard thing to do, because we all want to help. I want to help. I'm out of DV now and I just want to rescue everybody. And that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
That's not, I just want you to have a better life. But it starts with that learning how to communicate by basically just saying, I need to tell you a story.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really great fear for a lot of people who are in the situation as well. If I say it, it becomes real. And what if I tell a safe person and they tell me to leave and I don't straight away? what does that say about me? What does that say about my friendship? You know, the genie's out of the bottle. What if I'm not ready? How would you navigate that fear as someone who's in it, but also as someone who's trying to support? Let's just say you have a friend who's coming to you and saying, hey, my husband's doing this or this or this, or my boyfriend, my partner. And if you are that person who's receiving that story, how would you recommend that that person holds space so that the person who is speaking and talking about their experience can build their own relationship with self-trust without that fear of, okay, wow, the genie's out of the bottle now. I'm going to feel like I'm forced to make a decision one way or another. And then maybe I do know with some dynamics, people can leave too early and then they bounce right back. Not that there is a too early if you're physically unsafe, but speaking into that, I know that there are people who, and clients that I've worked with in the past who have been stuck in that cycle of, okay, well, how do I make this something that's the decision that I make is going to be supportive for me long term, not just short term as well.
So I have been on both sides, so I can speak into this from my own experience. And I know for a fact I couldn't have left mine without my support network. So as the people who supported me, I would say the people out there who maybe have someone in their life who's sharing this or is going to share this, or to allow yourself to be a safe space to receive this, allow them to share however they want to. And you have to bite back on jumping in and giving them unwarranted advice. If someone is sharing their story, actually ask them, would you like me just to listen? Would you like my advice? Would you like me to help? Ask them, because they have a right to then say yes or no. So first of all, let them share. Ask them if they want a reflection or advice. And if you are going to give advice, even if you've been through this yourself, please don't dictate how they should do it. Right, okay, you need to leave, you need to do this, you need to pack this, you need to no. You could offer names and numbers of organizations. You could offer to ring them on their behalf. You can share your experience in an open way. Say like, oh, this is what I did because I was in this situation, because everyone's situation is different. The biggest thing I would say is you're right about leaving. You know, it can take up to 7 times for a woman to actually leave this situation, this relationship, and stay out. If they do go back, or if they don't leave, you cannot judge them. And I know we're all judgmental in some way. You cannot judge them, and you cannot make it about you. I told you you should leave. I told you you should do this, because you're not in their shoes. Financially, maybe they can't. Maybe they don't feel safe. And honestly, most of us are still in love with our abuser and we want to be around them because that's the only dynamic we know. But I beg you, beg you, beg you, if you have this person in your life, and even if you're getting annoyed because they keep doing the same thing and they're not leaving and they keep talking about it, please don't abandon them. If they are a really an important person to you, they're really in your life and you want to support them, make sure you fill your cup. Make sure you take care of you. Maybe you need to talk to somebody to help balance out how much you're giving to this person. But I didn't leave straight away. I didn't leave for a long time. And I said the same thing over and over again to my sister and my best friend, in my coaching community, to therapists, who one of them was actually dictating what I should do, which was very dangerous, I thought, in my opinion. And I deep down knew they were right, but I wasn't ready and I didn't want to. But if they'd stopped listening, if they'd walked away, I would never have been able to leave. And I know that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody. And that's why I say fill your own cup and have your own support network. But this is what they need. The more that they felt like they're alone, the more they're left alone, they won't leave. They'll never be able to get out.
I think that's so important to have that sense of community. I think for all of us in any relationship as well, being able to feel like we have that network to land on, different versions of support for different versions of our own selves, so that when we are struggling in one aspect, our entire identity doesn't rest on the connection with just one person. It's incredibly important to have such a beautiful and loving and special relationship with your husband, your partner, and the relationship we have with others should enrich that. It shouldn't be, okay, well, if there are certain things that I can and can't say, places I can and can't go, then that's the determination of the intimacy that I have with my partner. If you share the same values, that's different. You know, this is how we have decided as a team that we want to show up socially. I mean, you mentioned earlier, you're in a partner who feels like they control the way you dress. It's different if perhaps you have had a conversation and this is a value that you both share around, okay, this is how we each like to dress. But it takes that self-trust and it takes that discernment to be able to figure out, okay, am I being controlled here? And some of that discernment does come from the richness of the relationships around us. If I feel a strong sense of support from the people around me, then everything doesn't hinge on a word that I mentioned at the start there, the enmeshment that I have with my partner, and that my safety does not rest on whether we are the same. How would you support someone who maybe is struggling at the moment with their place in community? Maybe they feel like they don't have a very strong network around them right now.
That's a hard one because it's such a key part of any life and any business, any social aspect to have the right people around you. That I would say, if it's safe to do so, start thinking about where you might be able to find them. So depending on what relationship you're in, you might not be able to leave the house without your partner, etc. But if you have kids, at the schoolyard, can you connect with other mums? Is there online groups you could join? Other organizations, like you say, can you even just speak to Lifeline and start there? And maybe they could point in the direction of other support groups. But I think sometimes we're jumping in thinking, I'm in an abusive relationship, or maybe I'm a DV survivor, for example, I have to go into that community. And that's not always the way. We're going to keep harping on about self-trust, but it's that aspect of, well, who am I and what do I like and where do I need to be for what I'm going through right now? And it might be a case of you're looking for the support network in something completely different. I started roller skating, wild, because my inner child was so happy and so free, and I just needed to do something physical where I could take my mind off things and be around people without having to constantly have a conversation. But there was a little bit of a risk because I might fall over and hurt my knee, which is clarifying. You don't have to look for a support community or network in the way that you think is so logical or even boring, so to speak. It doesn't have to be, I have to go run a coaching container and I have to sit and do shamanic healing. My God, maybe you're not ready for that. It's a lot. It could just be something really fun, something local, something you can get involved in where you don't necessarily have to talk about who you are and your background. Maybe you just have those surface level conversations, which is fine. When's the last time you got your hair done? Did you have a conversation with your hairdresser? Could you pick up a magazine and talk about what's in the gossip column? Just a way to talk to somebody, to interact, to have a laugh without having to be in the whole traumatic sense of, I have to share this, I have to tell my story, I have to go through everything. I'm not saying don't process it, but I'm saying you can process that in a different way by just making connections out of fun and by having a common interest. I have a lot of artists in my life right now, and they just sit together and they knit or they paint or they create things and don't necessarily communicate, but they're just together and they feel safe and they feel at home just by being around each other because they all have an interest in the same thing. So look around you, look at groups, and if you can't physically get out, there's so much stuff online. Look at apps, look at a way to connect with people. And if you are trying to rebuild your life after this, I even went on Bumble for Friends to try and meet people, just to have a connection where I could talk online, but I didn't have to go and meet someone in person. There's so many different ways out there that I think start with one, start small, and do something that's going to light you up and make you excited to go rather than feel like, oh, I have to have this huge conversation and it's too overwhelming.
I'd love to hear what you would say to perhaps the person who's listening that is incredibly good at performing. Everything looks great on the outside, and maybe they have their own business. Maybe they are doing very well in so many areas of their life, and they're listening to this conversation and it's scary and they're not quite sure how to even play around with some of these ideas. Maybe they're feeling a huge sense of overwhelm to be able to even ask some of these questions or play around with some of these ideas. And they're feeling torn between, if I even start asking myself these questions, I could lose everything and everything I've worked for, everything I've built. And, the phrase that we used earlier is just, well, it's not that bad. How would you support them to find their way into self-trust without feeling like it needs to be led by a huge sense of fear or even shame or even overwhelm, that perhaps finding themselves in situations like this where it's a debilitating circumstance, particularly when they are very good at performing, how would you support that person who perhaps is listening now?
Well, I'll start off by saying I was that person. I started my business in my last relationship mainly because COVID taught me I could. Great, fantastic. But the more I got into it, the more I started being successful and started supporting women because I started as a virtual assistant. I completely lost myself in it because I could get up really early, show up online and be this incredible business owner that got these amazing results and everybody loved me and I was killing it and making the money I wanted and everything, because it was the only way I could get up every day and face the day, because I could just sit in that world and not have to worry about this person behind me who is doing horrible things. For me, the problem was I was reaching burnout because I was pouring myself so much into business and into other people that I had nothing left for myself. And I actually had one client that I particularly got on with. And I don't even know how I started the conversation, but it was nearly morning and I said something about my relationship and she just stopped and looked at me and said, "You need to talk to me." And I said, no, it's all good. But at one moment I thought, oh, does she actually care? Can I actually share that? So I didn't. But what I did was the moments I could get alone. So for example, I was allowed to go for an hour walk a day and I did it on my lunch break. So when I had that 1 hour lunch break, I would walk this same route every day by the water, and I allowed myself about 10, 15 minutes on that walk to sit alone somewhere or stand alone somewhere with sunglasses and just cry. Because I just needed to release in a way that felt healthy. And I think women who are high performance, who are killing it, or who are very established, particularly with their reputation, etc., you're holding so much in that's when the breaking point comes. That you're like, I can't force it down. The more you force it down, it's going to erupt in the worst possible way. If you can just give yourself permission, I don't care, 5 minutes a day to scream into a pillow, to cry near the beach, it just helps to release that a little bit. And you get to feel human for a second. And I guarantee that you've forgotten what it's like to feel human. Women have so many pressures. I mean, if you're in a domestic violence relationship, if you have your own business, if you have kids, you have to do all the things, take care of the household, it's a lot. And you're not even giving yourself 5 minutes a day. And people think it's a lot and it's too hard and it's too much. And people don't want to cry, but crying is such a cathartic way to literally release. And once you start to do that and have that little trust that, right, this is my 5 minutes a day, maybe it becomes 10 minutes, maybe it becomes 15 minutes. Maybe then it becomes, I'm going to take a day off my business and go on a trip somewhere and reconnect with who I am outside of business. Who am I outside of this relationship? Because I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to jump to the next step and, right, I have to leave and do this and it's too much and I've got to talk to. But you're not doing just something for you that feels good for you, that doesn't involve anybody else, that doesn't warrant being a business owner or a mother or a partner. What can you do for you that's solely for you, that's going to help you reconnect to the person who created the business in the first place? Look how strong that person is. Look what you did. You built that. Or look at the child you have. You give birth to that child or you adopted that child. There's so many examples in your life that are nothing to do with other people relying on you or other people expecting you to be a role. You still did it. You still showed up and did the damn thing, as they say. Even go to your childhood. Maybe, I don't know, you won an award. You did that. Whatever it is, to give yourself examples of, this isn't expected of me, but I did it anyway. You got a client, an amazing result because you showed up and did the work. Congratulate yourself for that, because it's a huge thing. And if you can do hard things, you've proved it, you can do that in the future. And if you're not ready now, fine. But look for that evidence. Write it in your phone, look through the photos on your phone, find a childhood photo, find just one tiny way to connect to the person that you used to be or the person who did something that got you to where you are now, because not everything is bad. You still built something incredible and you need to remind yourself of that.
That's really, really beautiful. I am so glad that we got to have you on the podcast, Kat, and to be able to share your words of wisdom and to be able to share your heart and your experience and your bravery. Most importantly, your journey with yourself, to be able to break such an important pattern and to support others to be able to break those patterns too. Something that we like to do on the Connection podcast is ask our guests a question that was left by a previous guest. And a question that was left by a previous guest, just for you, is the question, if there was one thing you could change about the world today, what would it be?
So an easy question then.
They're always good. These questions are always good. They've become my favorite part of every episode. It's always something really unexpected. And the answers that come are always really, really unique. So I'm curious, what if there was one thing that you could change about the world today, what would it be?
What I would change is our priorities, because humans are essentially very greedy, selfish creatures. And we've become so obsessed with technology and advancements and becoming millionaires and all the things that we think should make us happy, particularly in business. We strive, we build and we develop that way. But the world is made out of oxygen and water and animals and trees and grass. And we're just not really prioritizing the fact that the planet is our home and we're not taking care of it the way we should. And I'm guilty of this. I know we all are in some way. But when's the last time you actually went out to a national park and did a walk, or you went to the beach and just looked at the waves? I want us to prioritize the actual earth and our home. We're coming together as a community. That's what we are on this planet. Yes, we're in different countries, we have different socioeconomic backgrounds. We have different priorities. We have different things going on. We're all busy, but we're one community on one earth, and it is our home. If we don't take care of it, then it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire. It doesn't matter if you've made the best development in AI the world has ever seen. It's not going to be here when we've gone. So take a moment to enjoy the earth and take care of it, because we can't exist without it. And I think we're forgetting that. We're just getting so obsessed with technology and the things we can't see, when you could reach down and actually touch the earth and just thank it, because we can't be here without it.
That's beautiful. I'm curious, what would be a question that you would leave our next guest?
Oh, this is exciting. My question would be, if you had one piece of wisdom to pass on to the next generation, what would you tell them?
Oof, that's a powerful one. And so I would like to ask you, if you had one piece of wisdom to leave the next generation, what would it be?
I would say take care of each other. Take care of each other, because life can be really hard and really cruel. And in my own experience, I wouldn't be here today without my community, without finding the people who had my back, who stuck with me through the hard times and the good times. And even being in business, I've met the most incredible women that I never would have been able to cross paths with if I hadn't been brave enough to start my own business. And I wouldn't have been brave enough to start my business without my community. So it all comes full circle. And we're all going through similar things, even if it's not the same thing. But if we can come together as a community, there's literally nothing we can't do.
That's so beautiful, Kat. Thank you so much for coming on the Connection podcast. I would love to hear how we can find you if the audience would like to follow along after this episode.
You can find me on all social media and my website at Cat Louise Dunn. You can also find out about my podcast and my live speakers events in Melbourne at Life After I Left podcast on Instagram.
Thank you so much, Kat. It's been such a joy to be able to hold space on this incredibly important topic with you. And if anyone in the audience is listening and something big has come up, or you'd like to dive deeper or have some more questions, please feel free to follow Kat and dive a bit deeper. Please feel free to jump into the DMs in Instagram with me. We're here to hold space, and we're blessed to be able to have this wonderful, rich and supportive community to be able to touch on these important topics and these valuable and precious learnings that we get to pass on and to break free from. Thank you for being here. Please follow along and join us on Instagram to continue the conversation, and we will be with you soon.